Good afternoon. I want to do really, I always say this, but I really do want to do a very quick video. Um, Only because I've mentioned over my past few videos that I've really been, whatever little free time I've been getting, I've been using it to clean up my garage in the sense that I'm really trying to get things out of the way, organized and all that. Not necessarily in my work area here. I've really, for the most part, have had that as good as I'm going to be able to get it for the past few years. But really, the rest of the garage is very time consuming. Getting rid of things, that whole 9 yards. But the other, I have a sort of a built-in on the other side of the garage. I've showed it before, and the door was sticking just a touch at the bottom, so I planed it off. A very fine shaving. I took it. Really only needed a couple passes, but I use this plane here. This is my very basic. This Bailey number 4. It's the I can't. I'll be honest. I don't know the type. It's the right after. I looked it up before. I just don't know it off the top of my head. It's the one right after World War II. So it's very common plane. And when I did that, I was holding the plane upside down, and so I ended up getting a lot of. I try to keep my tools really clean and oiled and everything. So I wanted to clean it out, which I did. And so what I ended up doing, I took the plane apart, and I wiped down the frog and got all the little bits of dust and everything out of there like you should do. And when I put it back together, normally what I do, whenever I do that, I probably, before I continue, let me say that I probably would have been a good idea to sharpen. A sharpening iron, you really should try to sharpen every time you use the plane. But that being said, what I did, I put everything back together, and usually I will reset the plane up, reset up the plane. And what I mean by that is, let me grab a board here. I'll get a board. Really helps if it has a nice square edge already. And sight down the plane. And first, this is more of a visual than feel. And it's going to be difficult to see this, but the gap where the light is coming through, you want that to be even. So if it's a little heavier or shallower on one side, you use your adjustment handle to make that as even as possible. Like that. Then you take a shaving, one down the middle, and one on each side. So automatically I see that this is much heavier on one side than it is on the other. And the reason I'm talking about this is when I went to set the plane up, that is pretty good right there. When I went to set the plane up, what I didn't do, there's a bevel. Hopefully you can see this, probably not, but there's a bevel that meets, let's try it this way, right here, where the bevel meets the mouth of the plane. I mean, where the frog meets the mouth of the plane, there's a bevel. And when I was adjusting the plane to set it back up to where it was taking even shavings, I didn't bother, because I'd removed the entire frog. I didn't bother really checking out how even that was. And that's the first thing I did when I took everything back apart, was I noticed that that was slightly askew, which is why I was getting uneven shavings. Pardon me there. And the reason I even bring this up is because it is one of those things that when we talk about new woodworkers, new people getting into woodworking, we tell them, we did a number 4 plane. This is for any plane, not just a number 4, obviously. But we tell them, make sure your plane is sharp. Make sure the sole is reasonably flat, and go to town. There are a lot of other little things you need to know when using a plane that you might not know if you've never used a plane before. And especially if you're using an older plane, a plane like this, which is about 75 years old now. If you're using this plane, I can pretty much guarantee you that it's not going to be set up right out of the, I don't want to say the box, obviously it's used, right out of where you got it from, the yard sale, the eBay purchase, what have you. And if you don't know all these little nuances, there's not, the planes are fairly, in terms of mechanics, planes are a fairly simple tool. Now I say that I couldn't make one of these in my house, so they're not that simple, but they're simple in the sense that there's only a handful of moving parts on them. But where these parts are located is just as important as what they do, and knowing where those parts should be is just as important as having your plane iron sharpened. So, being new to woodworking, those are one of those. This is one of those little, nuances that you may not be aware of when you first pick up a hand plane and it's not working correctly for you. And that's pretty amazing. They were all 3 even shavings right off the get-go. I didn't have to make any adjustments. And looking at the mouth there, it actually is pretty good. It is slightly, when I say slightly, I'm talking less than ½ millimeter askew. This plane does have a slight camber to the iron, as most smoothing planes usually will. It's funny, I always bother doing this, and sure enough, you end up doing some sharpening or cleaning. This side is slightly heavier. Try that one more time. But you do some sharpening and some cleaning, and you're back to square one every time. I guess that's one of the fun parts of using a hand plane. I always like to back it off slightly and see just how thin a shaving you can take. That was barely anything. And that's probably about as thin a shaving as I could take with the with the iron sharpened to the level that it is, which is barely anything there at all. The shaving is it's a full width and length shaving, but it's very likely less than a thousandth of an inch thick. So I don't. Before I go, I don't. I'm not a real believer in the shavings, that gossamer shaving thing. That's because I found you almost, if you're applying any type of finish to your project, whatever it might be, and you clean the surface, almost always you're going to end up sanding it at least a little bit, and that's why I don't really feel the need to plane down to that less than a thousandth of an inch type shavings that I just did. At that point, I would use probably go to a scraper or something to that effect before trying to get my plane to take these micro shavings, which you can obviously, you saw me do it here. It's not hard. It's just not really, to me, ultra necessary to do that. A nice, you want to, for me, if I'm smooth planing something to the finished level, the most important thing I do, I want nice even shavings all the way across the project, and I want them to be, you don't want to take these giant heavy shavings, but you want them to be very consistent, and I would say like the 3/1000, 4/1000 of an inch thick is really all you need to go to. You'll have people argue up and down that you can go even finer than that. Like I said, at that point, I'm using a tard scraper, and then I'm using like 220 grit and 230 grit sandpaper, or I'm sorry, 220 grit, 320 grit sandpaper, to put a very light shaving, very light sanding on it, and then putting my finish on, applying my finish, whatever that might be. So yeah, that's basically all I wanted to talk about. Is when this is information that's been on the internet, I suppose, for the past 10 years at least, but to me it's not hammered home enough. Setting up your plane, there's not too many plane setting up videos that I see that I like, put it that way. They're out there. They're certainly out there. I just don't like a lot of them the way they're way overblown. You don't need to. It's not. We're not setting up an electron microscope. We're adjusting a plane. But what I don't see enough is the frog, knowing where to keep your frog. Almost always I want the bevel of my frog, the angle of my frog, I mean, meeting the bevel of the mouth. I've seen people, they adjust that forward. I don't think you need to really deviate from the factory bevel that is on the mouth and the factory angle of the frog or the plane. They are generally, that's enough to do everything. There's these little adjustments back and forth really aren't necessary. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a great day, and I will be back hopefully soon. Thanks.